Well, greetings and welcome to Missoni Baia's virtual presentation. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. I'm Diana Boytel and I will be the moderator for today's talk. We are so honored and so excited to have a star architect, Mr. Hani Rashid, with us. Welcome, Hani.
Hi, Diana. Great to be here.
Thank you for
wherever we are.
All right, in space. Anyways, just going over, of course, Missoni Baia is an architectural glass jewel we have here on Miami's Biscayne Bay that you and your Asymptote company have designed here for the Oko Group. For those of you who are in the audience and not familiar with all your work, can you give us a little bit background on Asymptote, yourself, your wonderful marvels that you've created all over the world? If you can share some of those images, it'd be great. So, Hani, take over.
Absolutely. We started quite a while ago in Milan. Actually, we began the office in Milan and had sort of interesting experiences in the beginning of our practice with in the art world as well as in the architecture world, and did a lot of installation work as well as buildings. My partner Lizanne Couture and I basically formed the practice as a means to designing innovative, experimental at times, architectural work, city planning, also incorporating as much as we can cutting edge technologies, and then taking things from the art world in terms of phenomenal kind of experiences, the way we work with form and light and sculptural objects and so on. So yeah, these are projects. This is a project we're building in Russia for a new concert hall. This is a concert hall in Sejong, Korea. We've done all kinds of different projects, different scales. This is actually the rooftop of a project we built in Daegu, Korea, which is a kind of a museum, a multimedia museum there on the in that part of Korea. But we've done all kinds of work, and a lot of our focus has been in cultural work. That's actually the museum itself. That's in Miami. That's a proposal for a port terminal for Royal Caribbean there in Miami. And the work has moved between cultural projects, which we put a lot of stock in and enjoy doing, to in fact real estate projects and projects like Missoni Baia and commercial projects. This is a museum we're building in Moscow for the Hermitage. It's a museum of modern art for the Hermitage. And so yeah, it's a wide range of work. That's probably our most well-known building. That's the Yas Hotel in Abu Dhabi, which was is home to the Formula One race that they hold in Abu Dhabi every year, and the cars literally drive under and through that building. And that entire shell changes with the lighting as it goes from day to night, and it's quite an extraordinary building. And it was quite a interesting building for us to build, because we had to sort of pull out all the stops when it came to using technology to build, using BIM technologies and other kinds of fast track computer-driven or computer-tied-in technologies to build that building relatively quickly and very successfully. Yeah, so the work is pretty varied. It's always looking for a kind of some kind of a statement and some kind of an edge. This is actually in Ghent, Belgium, which is now almost completed construction for ING Bank. So yeah, it's varied work. It's we always make sure that people can somehow see the joy, I guess, and the exuberance and the passion that we put into our work. We don't see architecture merely as a business or as a kind of service industry. We see it as an art form. We see it as something that has impact on societies, impact on people. We like to bring something called the pride of place to our projects, where people feel proud to have these buildings in their community. This is again Abu Dhabi, the Marina Hotel. So yeah, there's a lot that goes into these projects. That's the Ghent building that in fact is just completed. And that's an interesting one, because it's in the middle of a sort of in a kind of fine-grained part of the city. This is in New York. This is the Perry Street building we built a few years ago, 166 Perry. Quite a successful project as well from a real estate point of view, especially. And yeah, it also carries with it the the DNA and the kind of, again, the kind of exuberance that we bring to making architecture. We find it a fascinating discipline and a fascinating world to work in. It's not really, it's not art, and it's also not pure science, but finding that kind of in-between road between, art and science, between sort of, the magic that art can bring to something, and the magic that science brings by virtue of its discipline. And so bringing that into architecture is really fascinating. This was just recently completed in Milan, a few 6 to 8 months ago now, and it was for Audi, and it was a construction built in the middle of the city in Piazza della Sempioni, which is a kind of the major square there, and it was this kind of beautiful project that housed the electric Audi cars in that space, in the city, in the space of the city. So I think that's maybe the run of the slides. Maybe there's more, I don't know.
It's major accomplishments. I mean, all those images are fantastic, and your talent and the firm's talents are incredibly amazing, iconic in every sense. And at least Miami now has a little dot of one of your iconic buildings in the Missoni Baia. So what brought you to decide on how to design Missoni? Give us a little insight as to your inspiration.
So, I think everywhere we work, we like to probe and understand what we call the sort of DNA of place, and the kind of things that make places interesting, and as I used the word before, magical and inspired. In Miami, we became really interested in. We've always loved Miami, especially being in New Yorkers. It's really the kind of, it's the other side of the hardcore life we live here. Maybe there's a little bit sense of more relaxing and, let's say, or chilling in the Miami sense, although it's not, it's also a very intense place. So we wanted to somehow find a way to bring to a new building there a kind of stature, a kind of dignity, a kind of maturity, let's say, in the architectural world and in the world of Miami urbanism. The way we see Miami, and I've said this before, but it really kind of ran, and maybe it's only because I watched my own son go through these stages, it ran through a kind of set of sort of aging process, from being a kind of rambunctious teenager at one time in its history, taking lots of risks and being kind of a crazy place and living on the edge, and then it's kind of matured in an interesting way into almost a kind of young adult mode now, where it feels very international, very cosmopolitan. It has fantastic art scene, fantastic life, quality of life. It's really becoming quite a remarkable place, and it's also very international, like New York. So it has this really powerful kind of interesting side to it, and that has to be expressed, we think, in the architecture. So our building, the Missoni Baia, was really approached as a kind of almost a kind of foil, you could say, to maybe the more sort of flamboyant buildings that go up in Miami, and not to be sort of contrast, but rather to sort of say, look, let's raise the bar, and let's talk about the kind of sophistication and elegance of the Miami skies, of the Miami, landscape, and of the Miami sort of skyline. So we went into a sort of discovery, let's say, design-wise, into sort of hardcore minimalist art. We've got really interested in trying to understand what makes a Donald Judd or a Dan Flavin or a James Turrell work, let's say, in terms of the American artists, to name a few. What makes those works so remarkably mystical and interesting, and silhouette especially. And so we kind of became very, very severe, let's say, in our sort of conceptual approach to try and create the most beautiful, elegant, minimal statement we could for the Miami skyline. And also we then got also interested in kind of optic. We do a lot of work with optics in general, and our work back in the world of when we were working in the art world has a lot to do with optic phenomena. So we said, well, could this building play against the light of Biscayne Bay? Could it change with the fascinating light changes that Miami experiences by virtue of its sky and its landscape and its proximity to the, being on the ocean and so on? So it really became a kind of experiment both in minimalism and optic kind of experiences or optic phenomena. And I think, as we'll know when the next, what we're 6 stories out now, so when the next
Eight, eight now, eight. I think we're eight floor now.
so we got a few more to go, and of course the glass and other things and the mega columns, and we'll see. But I think it'll be a very, very striking, beautiful, elegant, almost demure statement that we've made, and I think that'll be very much appreciated, not just for the next couple of years, or not just sort of as a trend or as a fashion, but I think for a very long time. And that's the other thing that I think part of this weird analogy of the place coming of age is that now we're looking further into the future, because when you do things at a kind of fashion level, it really just matters season to season, right? But if you start working for the long term, you start saying, well, what's classic? What will hold value? What will hold I mean, the Perry Street building I showed earlier in that quick slideshow was done over a decade ago now. And it's still, when I go by it on the West Side Highway, it's amazing how contemporary it still looks, and it holds up so perfectly and so well. And a lot of that has to do both with the architectural intention and also the quality of the detailing and the quality of the work we put in to make sure that it had a long-term story. Because for me, ultimately, I mean, if Missoni Baia is a remarkable looking building 25 years from now, I think that's really what we're targeting. It just stays consistently elegant and sophisticated.
That's what I find in your work. It's the detail, the precision of the drawing, the final product. Let's say, what 2 attributes in this Missoni Baia building that you feel that you're the proudest of?
I think it's probably the mega columns are very interesting. They were based a little bit at the beginning on yacht sales, on mega yacht sales, and on the sort of idea of these beautiful sort of launching sails into the sky. And so the four so-called mega columns are 4 fins. I think are really interesting, and they will give the building its really powerful identity. It's also what makes the building kind of, let's say, it's minimalism, but it's minimalism with a sort of an intention. It's not just a box. It's not just a kind of a clean, sort of, in that sense of minimalism. You really need those columns to allow the glass then to reflect the sea and the sky, and to frame it almost like a mega painting on the Biscayne Bay. And that's really what I think will be interesting, is that it's almost going to look under different lighting conditions, under different circumstances, under different atmospheres. It should really respond as almost a kind of an object under constant study of light, and change. And those columns really do that they frame it almost like a picture frame. The other thing I think is the fact that we early on with Vlad Dororan and the Oka group, we came to an idea of leaving behind the sort of condo logic of stacking units and balconies and kind of like filling out the floor plate to this idea of what we call villas in the sky. And so that this idea of floor through, on the 2 wings, these floor through units that pay as much attention to the city skyline as they do to the sea and to the water, and provide this kind of almost loft-like environment through the building, I think is really unique and interesting. And so that was, that then of course with the private elevators and other things and the amenities, makes for a very unique condominium building that leaves behind some of the tropes and let's say the cliches of that kind of building. In other words, I think the sense that you really have a private domicile set into the sky of Miami, and you feel like you live in this kind of singular unit floating in space, whatever floor you're on, I think is a big part of the success of what we see as successful with that project.
It's interesting, your quote about how Miami's grown, and it's funny that I've been around for like 35, 40 years here, and Miami was a sleepy little town architecturally speaking, and of course we had our little Art Deco area, and Morris Lapidus with his Fontainebleau that gave us some kind of architectural integrity as a city. And it's funny that you and I talked about earlier that Miami Vice came along onto the scene, and then of course Arquitectonica's building Atlantis became the iconic building in Miami. And then developers started hiring, the star architects like yourselves, Zaha Hadid now, and Cesar Pelli, Herzog and Demeron. So it's really, like you said, growing. It's becoming an adult. How do you see the future in Miami?
Well, I think, like I said, I mean, it's an interesting, yeah, Miami Vice is an interesting moment in Miami's teenagehood. And, but now I think, and the reason I guess certain architects are being hired or brought there, and certain developers have also raised their game and raised the bar. And it really does come from the developers raising the bar, quite frankly. I mean, they're the ones who invite us to work there. There's a that coupled also with things like Miami Basel, the new museums, the new cultural sort of exponents. I think everyone is seeing and understanding that the audience, sort of what you could call them, that the buyers, the customers, whatever, are getting more and more sophisticated and demanding more from their cities. And Miami is kind of getting up to the task of providing a more alluring. It's taking already the things that really work and have worked historically, but add to that more desirability. A place that is more alluring to people from all over the world who like to be, in the Miami dream, let's say, in the Miami context. So I think it's you can feel it shifting and changing and becoming more and more, as I said, the words I used before, more sophisticated, more elegant, more cosmopolitan, because I think the people coming there are also bringing that with them. It's not just a matter of, and I'm not going to typify what Miami Vice was about, but it's not just a matter of sheltering money and whatever that was all about. I think now it's sort of, serious investors and serious people who also want a lifestyle that Miami has to offer. And don't forget, we're sitting here talking from our homes and in this middle of this crazy pandemic. So the idea of a healthy, of a healthy lifestyle is very appealing. And Miami has a really, it has a brand it can develop and is developing on that alone, on that part, as well as culture and other things. I mean, it has to, sort of put itself there as one of the more powerful places when it comes to health and well-being, and I think it has that potential. Our building is very much about that. I think, with Deroran's background and ownership of Aman Resorts, I think that pedigree is in our building. We've sort of, it has a big part to do with the spas, obviously, and the health components of the building. But the building is about, sort of a future looking towards the idea of being healthy, of living, a healthy lifestyle as much as possible. And that's, Miami's shifting that way as well, I think. I mean, there's still the crazy nightlife and other things that offset that.
We can have it all. I think so. I think it's become a good international playground for everybody. And you're right, the expectations are there. Our developers are stepping up. Dornan is a highly sophisticated developer, and the other developers around too are stepping up to the plate, not building these autonomous residential towers any longer. So that's really nice to see. And with our current confinement situation, to play on your design for the villas in the sky, the home has become our sanctuary. And my partner Liliana Pinto Torres and I just sold one of the 2 penthouses recently. And your team, along with Oko Development, are creating this phenomenal spaces for him because he does want his villa in the sky to be able to come here and just veg out and just to, even if another pandemic comes, he's set. What other floor plans do you see in the future that will help us, come through these maybe difficult times or create new spaces for new technology? What is the future for designing for new homes?
Well, it's interesting because home design and condo design and commercial real estate has always worked in a little bit of a, if you want to look ahead to understand that world, you look into the sort of avant-garde of where we're going when it comes to designing domestic spaces, private homes, You know, and even other places we're working, like in museums or office space and so on. And by that, what I mean by that is that there are indications and hints as to how people's desires are shifting according to their domestic space. One thing for sure, and that's become extremely heightened through this whole pandemic experience, is that people are going to demand more. And we've always known this. We actually put this forward 10 years ago with Perry Street building, and we made it part of our Baia planning as well. But that the home office, you know, situation or the working from home situation is becoming more and more real. It's not just now a kind of a, you know, I pull up a desk on the other side of the room where you can't see the bed and do a Zoom call, you know, or something like that. It's really has to be part of our plan. It's the same way that open kitchens, you know, came. You know, there was a time, of course, as we all know in history, when the kitchen was hidden in the basement or far away or in another part or another building. And then as we got into modernism and modernity, and the idea of the open plan space, the idea of having your kitchen as your living space and having people gather in the kitchen for parties and so on and so forth, you know, took hold. And I think we're going to see some interesting shifts that way in terms of our professional lives mixed with our domestic lives. And it'd be interesting, you know, we have to sort of think about planning those kinds of things. And the corollary to that is true as well. We're doing work in the world of offices of the future now, and looking at how we're going to bring domestic space into the office environment, so that people feel a more sort of seamless, let's say, transition between home life and professional life. Having said that, there's even more of a yearning for the domestic and for privacy. Privacy is a big deal, and becoming more and more a big deal. And I think we see that manifest already in its kind of early stages in things like spa bathrooms and you know, sort of you know, living spaces that segue into spa-like environments, you know, and things like that. So there's kind of two gravitational pulls. One is, you know, how let's say the professional life segues with the domestic life and how they fit comfortably. And the other one is, you know, the way that we can get more privacy, more of a sense of home, more of a sense of escape in the domestic space. And those things they're in the works in private works, and you see them in sort of avant-garde projects and different kinds of work. We're doing a lot of work in the hospitality area, like we're doing a big project in Tuscany, a big sort of spa environment there, and a lot of those ideas are being tested at that level in terms of the hospitality world. But I think they come over eventually to the sort of you know, to places like Missoni Baia and the planning of domestic, of condominiums and that kind of space.
I have a question from the audience. Let's get a bit more of a human interest. How did you become an architect? What inspired you? I'm sure there's a story there. Can you share it with us?
Yeah, I wonder sometimes why I didn't become an investment banker or a real estate agent.
Or you can be both like me.
No, as a child, I grew up with a you know, pretty creative family. My brother's a very well-known industrial designer, and my dad was Hani Rashid, and my dad was a terrific, a really serious artist in every sense of the word. He studied in Paris in the 50s, and studied art very deeply. He was committed to art in a very thorough sense. He wasn't just kind of he didn't believe in galleries or any of that, or the commercial side of it. He was like one of the hardcore, probably one of the last Mohicans, because in that period there was some really hardcore artists who've kind of left us. Unfortunately, my father's left us too. But so we grew up in a house full of, you know, oil paintings and sculptures and all kinds of, you know. My mother was very literary. She's British, and she's very much sort of brought a kind of an intellectual side to my upbringing. And so, you know, I think having just grown up in that world, I just didn't see any other life than being a creative person. However, my father used to say to me all the time, please don't become an artist. It's a life of suffering.
It's a hard life, yes.
Yeah. And I said, well, you know, he's suffering to me. He's painting all the time and enjoying his work. But it was pretty, you know, but it's very deep. When you're really working at that level, I think it can be tormenting for certain artists. So I think that I decided to become an architect out of default because I actually wanted to become a filmmaker. And I started studying film, and then I found a film made by an architect, and I was so fascinated by the way that film was structured that I thought, you know, that's a kind of, maybe I'd rather do that. I'd rather do the sort of structural side of the art of film than, it's a little complicated, but that's where I was heading. So, but then I realized when I got into it that it was really a natural fit for me, because my father reminded me that when I was young, I used to go to his studio. He used to also do stage scenery and sets, and I would go to his studios with him as a kid. Both my brother and I would go, and he would always show us little models or drawings. I think my brother took to the colorful drawings. I took to the models, and I love the idea that these little tiny models would actually become physical things, because he'd show us the sets built from the models, and I was just fascinated with this kind of transition from an idea to reality.
Yeah.
So yeah, so those things just were part of the, you know, the drivers. And then when I found the discipline, you know, when I entered it, I realized that there's a lot to repair in the discipline, and that's what made me so excited about becoming an architect, that I could maybe contribute something, because the discipline sits in a weird place. Sometimes some architects treat it purely as business, and as a kind of a service profession, and other architects treat it as a high art form. And I kind of wanted to find the middle ground, where it's you know, a viable business, but actually produces really important, sort of, that it has an impact, and it's there. You know, the one thing you do realize about architecture is that we're not working in the short term. As I said before, we're doing things that affect people's lives. It has big impact. We have big social contracts, you know, with society to do things. And today that runs, I think I didn't mention, that also runs into things like using more and more sustainable materials, being more conscious of the planet we live on, being a more, you know, responsible person contributing to the built environment. So it's a loaded and heavy profession, but the side of it that, you know, is so interesting is that there's a lot of place for invention, and there's a lot of room for it to make things better, and so that's that combination of things.
I hope so. I hope so. With architects like you,
And
it definitely
I'm
can be a better
crazy.
world. There'll be a better world with people like you. That leads me to something I find fascinating. Your educational background to me is outrageous. I mean, I find it so exciting. I know your partner, of course, is a Yaley, Lisanne Couture is a Yaley, and you decide to go to the Cranbrook Academy of Art.
I
You hear
lost you
me?
there. Can you do that
Oh,
again? I lost you.
okay.
Yeah, yeah.
I was taking on the fact that that you're fantastic, of course, and I find your educational background fascinating, and I wanted you to kind of share with us your journey. Your partner, Lisanne Couture, went the Yale route, and you decided to go an artistic more route. I think I consider to going to Cranbrook Academy of Art, which has a legacy, of course, of brilliant modernists coming out of there, from Saarinen to Knowles to Eames. How did you come about going there, and how did that influence your architecture?
Well, you know, Lisanne and I met in undergrad, and we had both, Lisanne came out of a world, a very different world than me, her father being a very, very important doctor, and her life at the time I'd met her, she was on the Canadian national ski team as a freestyle champion.
Wow.
So she was out there doing crazy things and on skis, and I was trying to do crazy things on paper. But I think that what happened was we kind of both decided in undergrad to kind of go our separate ways and study, you know, go after our own calling, let's say, in terms of architecture. And Lisanne went to Yale, worked there with Frank Gehry and others, and had a terrific education in her postgraduate work. And I went to Cranbrook, yes, and I chose it because I was fascinated with I felt that 5 years of undergrad training was very pragmatic, and I had learned how to build a building, which was fine. I learned how to plan a building, okay. I learned how to, you know, make a building, but I didn't feel like I'd learned how to be an architect. And to be an architect, I felt I needed to upgrade my education substantially, and I needed a place that would allow me to develop a body of work. And Cranbrook was and still is an extremely special place, because it's a very almost a monastery-like place. as you said, has had an amazing impact on American architecture because it was built by Ilao Saarinen, who came from Finland, thanks to a man named Booth, who industrialist in Detroit. And then he had an offspring called Eero Saarinen, and Eero Saarinen went on to become one of my heroes and one of the great American modern architects. And then also, of course, Florence Knoll and the Eameses and so many other interesting people. And I think that the school allowed these kinds of seminal voices to emerge because of its ability to, if you had the right mindset, to kind of lock yourself down and work on a body of work in a very private way, almost in a kind of an old school, almost like a medieval craftsman strategy of just really working at your art. And so those were 2.5 really special years for me in my master's program. And then, from there, that was it. And then I moved to Milan and started Asymptote right away. And Lisanne came to Milan and joined me and became partners. And then she said that she hated Milan and we need to leave quickly because there's too much pollution. And so we came to New York.
It was a beautiful ending. It was a beautiful ending. I love that you got together and you're now creating together these wonderful works of architecture. Any questions you have for me as in sales that from Missoni Baia? They asked me to ask that question.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'd be really interested to hear from because you have a background in architecture. Also, I think it'd be interesting to hear if there's anything about the building that we could have done better or we did well, and how it works from your point of view.
It is welcomed by everybody. Everybody's in awe of it. The beautiful glass skin is gorgeous. To be able to see the water from all the apartments is something to be cherished. The floor plans, everybody is very happy with them. Your details on the balconies, I find totally mesmerizing. The 30,000 square foot amenities, I mean, everything you put together there is fabulous. I'm so looking forward to the final product. Another question came in, questioning how did you get involved with Missoni Baia? How did you meet Vlad, a vocal group by yourself? Was he a follower of your great architecture? How did you get involved with Missoni Baia?
Vlad is a consummate collector. And he collects art, as you know, and I think he likes to collect architects, maybe. I think what happened was, I know that he had heard about me through the now departed Zaha Hadid, who we all miss. And Zaha, I think, I never worked for Zaha, but I had an interesting friendship with her because we were teaching. She was a little older than me, but she came to Columbia University when I was starting out as a professor there. When I was 28 years old, and I remember her being very interesting and open to the stuff I was doing. And at that time, I was doing a lot of work with early computing and digital technologies, and Zaha had never seen that before, and she was fascinated, which is hard to believe, but there was a time when she was just putting, sort of planes together and beautiful paintings, and so we had a kind of interesting dialogue, and then we know what happened to the work from there, and it went. She really got very, very far into that work, into that side of the work. But I think it was we always had an interesting friendship, and I think she must have suggested to Vlad to meet with me because I think he came over to our studio one day. And the funny story about him being in our studio was that he was sitting in our conference room, and as Vlad is, spending a lot of time on his phone, texting something and kind of paying attention. And I was very nervous because I was presenting a project to him and I wanted some attention from my client, but he was busy, preoccupied. But he all of a sudden looked up and he saw the chandelier in our office, and he said, I'm not going to do his Russian accent, but he said, where'd you get this? And I said, it's mine. I designed it. He goes, you designed this? And I said, yeah. He goes, I own one of these. And I said, well, where did you get yours? He goes, Miami Basel. He bought one of the 5 we had on sale at Miami Basel.
Oh my God, it was meant to be.
And he installed it in his house, but he didn't put 2 and 2 together. I guess he thought he'd bought a work of an artist, not an architect, and so it didn't register. And then he was shocked that that we and then things went quite nicely and smoothly after that. And then he liked the project, which was really the most important part. Yeah.
Excellent. So how do you? I know Missoni Baia is your first building now in Miami. Do you plan something in the future, or how? do we plan a secondary office here in Miami? What is your personal vision of Miami as a canvas for your architecture?
Well, we love working there, and we have also projects on the boards in Wynwood, and we have another project that we've been working with a few years now, but it seems to be stop and go on Flagler, and so and we're registered now in Miami because of those projects, all of them. So yeah, I like the renegade. I mean, given the analogy I said earlier of the sort of childhood to teenager to young adult, I think I also like the fact that Miami is not losing its kind of renegade spirit, and I think that helps a lot with architects like me because or like us, because we really thrive on places that see themselves as progressive, as cutting edge, as desiring a future. Not looking into the past, not trying to be nostalgic. These are places where we operate the best, and for clients we operate the best for, because also it allows us to also do research. Because part of, I said earlier about my education and all that, but one of the key things that I think holds Lizanne and I holds us together as a partnership, but also holds our work quite high up, is that we're constant, perpetual students, and inquisitive and wanting to learn all the time. We never sit on our laurels. We never sort of figure we've made it, or that's why I don't even like the word star architect. I find it kind of disconcerting. It's just, no, but we just want to take every opportunity to learn and to push, and that's what gets us up in the morning, gets us working on stuff. And I think Miami is the kind of place that has that kind of momentum. It pushes you to think, because there are other places you work where people say, oh, come on, can you make it look like such and such a style, or can you bring back some of the history and blah blah blah. But Miami's definitely a future looking place, and so for us it's great. Yeah, we'd love to do a lot of work there, and we're I mean, also it's nice. I also would like to be there in the winter here, so.
We have a lot of advantages here in South Florida, that's for sure. Another question came in, very interesting. Have you and your brother, Karim, ever worked on a project together or ever planned to?
That I've had that a few times thrown at me. We have not. We've tried. We are so different in many ways. Yes, we're tied by blood and by relation, of course, but our minds work very differently when it comes to the problems of design. And in a way, I admire his work a lot because he's able to work in a kind of he can work in a way that can appeal to a lot of people quickly and be very kind of digestible work, like people can get it, in terms of color, form, shapes, and so on, and that's terrific. I, on the other hand, I'm not so. Of course, I'd love for people to get my work fast and understand it, but again, like I said earlier, I'm working on a much more long-term project. It really doesn't matter to me if something is sort of at the top of the charts on the day it launches. It needs time, and that's part of architecture. And I think it's just we respect each other's domain that way, because I know for a fact that if I work in architecture in a more quick turnaround kind of way, like you can do in product design, it's bound to fail. Architecture will not stand up after a while. It may look good in an image or a rendering, but it takes a lot for something to be to have all the sort of all the sort of boxes checked and the weight to have that longer picture. On the other hand, when it comes to his world, I think he needs the quick turnaround. It doesn't make sense. He can't design an object or a fashionable thing that's going to take 4 years to make sense. It has to make sense the day it shows up on the market. So, and that's the other thing. Don't forget, when we started Baia 4 years ago now, maybe longer. And we have to design, 10 years out all the time, maybe even further. But by that I mean when it does have the ribbon cut, when it does open, if a building is going to, be important and be desirable, it can't be something that looked good on the boards 4 years ago or 5 years ago, and met certain kind of fashion like quotients. So that's just different modalities and different paths and different works we're doing. So if we try and do something together, we tried once. inevitably we butt horns because I'm looking one way, he's looking the other. So it's just not. But we have a lot of respect for each other's work and what we're both trying to do. Absolutely.
Your parents are very lucky to have such extremely talented boys. That's wonderful. Well, I have no other questions. So anybody else have any questions? Just to remind everybody, I want to thank you so much, Mr. Hani Rashid, for taking the time to be with us and sharing all your insights. I want to remind everybody that Missoni Baia is available via virtual presentation. So please contact us. We are roaring and building and on the 8th floor and with a I think completion date is the end of 2021. So hope you all can come visit us. Thank you so much for a wonderful talk. It was lovely talking to you.
Thank you, Diane. Wonderful seeing you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Oko Group. Thank you, Missoni Baia. Bye-bye.